given the fact it's now 2 or 3 minutes past 5 and we're scheduled to start at 5, I want to make sure that you have plenty of time to speak, Lucy, and I want to make sure that students and guests have plenty of time to ask questions as well. So I'll start saying a few introductory comments. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the College of Social Sciences and International Studies Honorary Graduate Speaker Series. This is the third event of the term. My name is Dr. Martin Robson. I'm Academic Director of the Strategy and Security Institute here at Exeter, and I'm delighted to be able to host our guest speaker for the evening, Colonel Lucy Giles. I'll say a few words to introduce Lucy, and I will be managing the questions at the end of her talk. In order to do that, what I'd like you to do is either put your hand up or put a question in the chat, and I will go to you. And if you could unmute and turn your camera on, that would be great, because it brings people into the talk and into the environment. And I'm sure Lucy would love to see you all at some point as well. So Lucy studied at the University of Exeter, where I think your military career would have began with you joining the OTC. And I'm sure we have some OTC members here who probably have some interesting questions to ask you later on. After graduation from the university, she joined the Royal Logistic Corps of the British Army, and saw postings in Germany, the UK, and South Africa, alongside deployments to Bosnia, and that was 3 deployments to Bosnia, was it? Excellent. To East Timor and to Sierra Leone as well. After gaining her master's at the Staff College and completing what we call ACSC, the Advanced Command and Staff course, she was then posted to the HQ Northern Ireland. Lucy commanded 47 Air Dispatch Squadron, assisting and enabling operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, so has a huge amount of operational experience. He then joined or rejoined or reattended the Staff College as an instructor in 2011, focusing upon aspects of command, leadership and management. She gained her postgraduate certificate in education in 2013. Lucy has had a career which is encapsulated with a few firsts, which are really, really important. In January 2015, she was appointed to be the first female college commander at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. She then went on to win the Inspirational and Woman of the Year awards at the inaugural Women in Defence event in late 2016, and followed that with an honorary doctorate from Exeter University for services to the military in 2017. In her current role, Lucy serves as the 36th and first female president of the Army Officer Selection Board. Alongside all of that career, she finds time to give something back to good organisations and causes. She's an ambassador for First Women UK, a Girl Guiding Ambassador, and maintains a healthy interest in sport and fitness activities, etc., as one would always expect from military personnel. Lucy, your distinguished career places you in an excellent position to talk on your subject this evening, which is your perspective of leadership. Lucy, delighted to have you. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Martin, for that very kind introduction. And I have to say, I'm delighted to be here on a Monday evening to be able to have the conversation with all your amazing students and the staff as well that are out there at Exeter. It must be pretty tricky times at the moment, and so my thoughts are with you, hey, let's have a conversation and have an interesting discussion. And the idea here is I'm going to give you a viewpoint over the next 15-20 minutes, if that. I'm really interested to be able to answer any questions that are on your mind at the moment. And it may be something that can help you with your studies, with your dissertations, with your masters, and I'm very open for you to follow any of this up as well afterwards. I've offered, and you've probably seen it on the chat, a couple of sources of information that may be helpful to you. Again, if I can help signpost you in any other directions, then just give us a shout and we can always follow up after this conversation. So, well, I thought what I would do is frame my sort of experiences over the last sort of 28 years of Army service into what we finally written down as an Army called our leadership doctrine. And I didn't want anyone to get too excited that it's some kind of big, massive, weighty tome. It isn't, because we're in the army. So it's got to be nice and simple, especially for someone like me to sort of get the gist of it. But basically in 2015, we codified our thinking on leadership. We were often the go-to sector for, leadership in a crisis. What would you do? What tools can you use for this problem-solving situation or in other broader activities? And so the Army wrote it all down. It's called the Army Leadership Doctrine. And it's a really useful handrail. And it's that I'm going to be using to be able to form or sparks maybe some ideas in your for all of you out there. So the doctrine really looks at four main areas. What we try and do there is think about, well, what do leaders need to be? What are they? So that's the first pillar. The second pillar is, what do leaders need to know? That's the second pillar. Then it's what do leaders then do? Third pillar. And then the final pillar, and I think personally, the most critical one and the one that's gained traction in the last few years is how they do it, the behaviours. So taking each one of them in turn, if I may. So what leaders are is looking at them as champions of values and standards. And we have a set of values. We've got a list of what we see as important for being ourselves in the army, and we've got a set of standards that we need to live towards and be better than our society that we represent. So those values and standards and being champions of those are where we're at in terms of what leaders are. So it's being the example, it's being responsible, it's being influential. That's where we're sort of at in that space. So for example, there's no good me joining the army when I know that I'd love to be able to have overindulge in certain substances at the weekend, because the army just doesn't allow it. It's got a zero tolerance to it. So if that's a way of choosing to live your life, that's one thing. But that doesn't align with the values of the organisation I'm representing. I'm not making a judgment on people's choices here. I'm just trying to exemplify how important it is to really understand the values of any organisation that you are aligned to. And my observation really when one is trying to unpick what leaders are, is if your values change over time or your circumstances change, then it's often an opportunity to reevaluate where you sit against where your organisation is. Equally, as the organisation may change its values or direction, and it might be because somebody else has just taken over the department, the seat, whatever it might be, then that's an opportunity as well to reevaluate. And I always look at it as you're on a compass bearing. And if you deviated from it for whatever reason, that you need to understand that, be aware of it, and either be comfortable with that deviation or do something about it. So what leaders are, the essence of their values, their standards is really, really important. And when you're looking at one of the bits of information I've invited Bex to put on the chat, which is a piece on a practitioner's guide. I know it's all back to front, but leading through crisis, a practitioner's guide. One of the key bits here is understanding where you're sitting in the organisation that you're at, so understanding what you're about. So that would be my first observations on what leaders are. Then if we move then into what leaders need to know, that competency, that professional standing, the question there is why is that important? Well, in my profession, it's the difference between somebody following you because they trust you, they believe in you, they want to follow you because they believe in what you're saying and what you're doing, more importantly, as opposed to just merely following you out of interest and curiosity, see what you're going to do next. So it's a trite observation, but if people don't, if you're not intellectually curious about your profession or the organisation that you're in, and you're not keeping that learning, you're not in the learning mindset to be able to continually get at the professional competencies. I mean, I've got plenty of colleagues who have done what they needed to do in their 20s and 30s, and then they've stopped any kind of learning. I mean, how can you progress or be innovative and creative if you've saturated yourself at one level and are not curious to be able to develop yourself into the future? Also, you will be overtaken by other people who have got a little bit more to them, perhaps, and do want to harness that professional ambition and curiosity and just go forward. So being able to know what you're talking about is really important in a leadership role. And we in the Army will every year do our military training to keep our competencies up, our basic competencies up to speed, whether that be fitness, our understanding of values and standards. We do training on an annual basis to make sure that that's very clear. Whether that be shooting, whether it be medical work, all of the real basic soldiering skills we have to do on an annual basis. So, I mean, the question I throw out to you as you develop through your journey as whether you're staff or students here, have a think about where the next thing is that you're going to be heading for, and what do you need to do to add value to your suite of knowledge, skills and experience. Well, it's the knowledge and also includes those problem-solving skills and decision-making skills that you may need to draw upon. We have frameworks for thinking in the Army. It's not difficult. It's just basic, what is the aim? What am I trying to do? What's my part in the plan? Factors do I need to consider? What courses of action have I got open to me? What are the pros and cons? Those sort of decision making, thinking frameworks and decision making tools are not rocket science, but they help us when the chips are down and when you're tired, wet and hungry in the middle of the field or on an operation. So have a simple, my advice there would be have a simple framework to use to help you think when you're under a little bit of pressure. I've sort of talked about what leaders are, what leaders know. Now, the next thing is, what do they do? And here, the model we use is based upon the Professor John Adair, who is well versed in a lot of leadership tomes, and was a lecturer at Sandhurst in the 60s, 70s when these models were developed, and many organisations use them. But this is about, if you imagine concentric circles which look at individuals, tasks and teams. And when I mean those three various circles, it's developing individuals, it's building your teams so that you can achieve your tasks. And the interesting thing here is where you, as a leader, sit within those goose eggs, if you like. If you spend too much time focused only on the task, in my experience, you do that at the detriment of your team, who will be just breathing a sigh of relief when you've moved on and doing something else. And actually you break organisations by being only over-focused on the task in hand, at the cost of your people. we are a slightly in the military and the armed forces in general can be a bit different to other organisations. We're not driven by money. That's not our raison d'etre. It's for other, although it's an inevitable part of the business, but that's not what drives us. It's our people that drives us. And I've got a little maxim here that's on my army cup, which says, people are the army, not in the army. People are the army, not in the army. So that balance between where you sit, between achieving your task, having built your team and developed your individuals, is really interesting. I'm not saying that you should be in one place equally, but you just got to sit in the space of just only focusing on the individuals. It's a balance, and it's iterative, and you're continually looking at it. So I would say that when you're looking at developing individuals, in my case, it's how well do I really know my soldiers? I was one of the things I did when I was younger was, and a young troop commander, is I had 30 people in my platoon, was very excited about it. I had an interview with them all, and I wrote down, what their names were, what their wife was called, where they lived, what their hobbies were, etc. And I thought by doing that I really knew them. And when it came to a gradings board where I had to put their competencies to my bosses and try and get them promoted, I realised I really didn't know them. I didn't know what made them tick. I didn't know where their strengths. One I reminded my in my office, which has got my first troop, to help remind me to keep my feet on the ground. And the only way that I find, if you're wanting to really develop the individuals and really cut about and get to see them, sometimes in the work environment and sometimes out of the work environment. And that's where I think it's challenging at the moment, because we're doing so many of these things virtually that we lose that interaction, I think, with our people. So it's one to be, so how else can we create it? That's always the challenge. And there may be other ways of getting esprit de corps and understanding your people and developing them that's out there. But so developing your people. The other area, I talked a bit about the task and about over-focusing on it and developing the individuals, but it's also about how you build the team. Now, one of the things that I'm a massive fan of, and I'm a big advocate of, and as most organisations are, most people in their organisations are, is the importance of diversity. But you can't, and diversity means diversity. So you've got a bit of a spectrum, however you choose to categorise diversity. So for me, when I'm working in the army, and we need to have more overt, diverse teams, I think. We're getting at it, but we're not there yet. But one of the things we have now come around a lot more to is the importance of cognitive diversity in our teams. So that's thinking differently. And I'll give you a short vignette. Where one of my colleagues was running, he was on operations, and he was about to do a particular combat operation in Afghanistan with his company. He had everybody around a planning table, and they were doing a rehearsal of concept. So they were rehearsing how they were going to do an insertion operation into this particular area of enemy, put it that way. And they all thought they had this wrapped up, and so they were just going through the motions. But one of the team, the leader couldn't be there, so they got substituted by a junior NCO. So this is a young corporal, and the junior NCO, as all of this sort of pomp and ceremony was going on and this planning round was going on, came up with something and said, words to the effect of, actually, if you do that, sir, it isn't going to work because of X, Y, and Z. And nobody had seen it at all, because they were all fairly similar in their outlooks, similar training and background, and they just hadn't seen it because they hadn't thought of asking the people on the person that was going to be doing the business what their viewpoint would be. So when you're building your team, it's important that you respect that diversity, making sure obviously inclusivity is a partner to that, but it's slightly different, as you good people probably realise. But it's setting clear direction, in getting a cohesive team working, but also a resilient team. So you've got, I don't mean physical resilience, I mean mental resilience as well. So that means practicing as a team and getting things wrong and being allowed to get things wrong. So again, it goes back to learning culture and being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and not always having the right answers, but surrounding yourself with people who, with the right spark and empowerment, can come and generate some great ideas. So that's what I mean about what leaders do: balance the development of individuals with building of the teams to achieve the task. So the final pillar that I throw out there for debate and for you to consider is about how leaders do their art, or their based upon a bit of management science possibly, but what is it that's going to make the difference in how they do deliver leadership, perhaps? And I would say that it's linked into how we all behave in a team as individuals when we're trying to achieve the tasks. The Army Leadership Code, and I've given you a link to the 32-page, very brief document that you can scan, encapsulates those behaviours. Because we've got, because we're in the Army, and this is written for CGS, and who by his own admission really needs to make sure he's got the mnemonics right. We've called it LEADERS, LEADERS. Those all stand for a behaviour, roughly. And those are what we use as a framework to measure how we're behaving in the different contexts that we all work in. So this is a model that's useful whether you are a junior soldier, craftsman, or whether you are the Chief of the General Staff, as I mentioned. And I have physically done the test where I've done this very simple analysis of what we think we mean by good leadership by example. What does that actually mean? And it means different things to different people, and it depends on whether you're trying to exude exemplary leadership, or whether you are on the receiving end of what good looks like or not, or what I should say, what it feels like or not. So the LEADERS acronym is quite handy. It's in that pamphlet, but I can just briefly get myself around to, I can briefly explain that. It's, let me just get it to the right page. It's quite useful, and I've got it in the back of my notebook for me to refer to on occasions, because when I think I'm not quite getting things right, I go back to that to remind myself that actually, there is a balance in how we demand high performance and so on. So it's lead by example, encourage thinking, apply reward and discipline, demand high performance, encourage confidence in the team, recognize individual strengths and weaknesses, and strive for team goals. So in the world of some of the conferences and things I've gone to, we've literally put that on a piece of A4 paper, and we've all scribbled on it. And this is brigadiers and full colonels, as well as staff sergeants, and all of us mucking in, and it's really interesting what comes out in terms of what people really think. And my analysis of all of that, because that's a whole, that's a module in itself on how you behave. But my down and dirty analysis of doing those kind of things is that it's the simplest things that can make the most profound difference. So, and I'll give you some examples that I've felt and also hopefully exemplified myself. So, if I'm standing in front of a cadet at New College, which is what I was doing for 3.5 years, and I'm there telling them off about how they are dressed, and I'm looking like a bag of goodness knows what, then that is not instilling any confidence or respect for me in the leadership role I have. I'm sure that's a pretty obvious one. Being late when I'm doing a lecture on, being on time is not good. So those are really obvious things. What's a little bit more subtle is the encouraging thinking. And in my first year at New College, so it was 2015, 2016, I had a cadet that came through who got absolutely paralytically drunk at a company dinner night. It was in the context of this, there's a little bit of naughtiness and behaviour going on up to that point, and so this was the last straw. So there was an element of being made an example, and that individual, through me, went to a review board by my general, and he was removed from the course. So that was his career, the trajectory he was on, that was that over. Now, a year later, and it was still under my watch, he rejoined and he went on to the commissioning course. And at the same period of time, so the intermediate term on the year-long course, so at about sort of week 20, he did exactly the same thing. And but this time, I brought him in, and then I put it to him that I made the connection more explicitly, or suggested why his behaviour hadn't met our values and standards. And I could see a little bit of eyes glazing over, and it wasn't booze, it was just it wasn't clicking. And I said, right, okay, what I would like you to do is I want you to do a presentation, not just to me, but to your platoon, and explain why this is not good behaviour for when you go in and you're working at regimental duty. So, because the soldiers actually, although they might, do want to have a leader that they can trust and respect, not one that can't have an element of self-control. So we got him to have another, to do that presentation. I also invited him to go to the medical centre so he could understand that 2 bottles of wine and 10 pints of beer wasn't a good evening out. He hadn't made that connection either with his relationship with alcohol. So on all sorts of levels, we addressed what we saw as a bit of a problem. So what happens? He passes out. As selected, sorry, I should say passed out in that context. He commissions as an officer, goes into his new unit, and is an extremely effective young subaltern who has learnt from the experience. So, and if we hadn't have reset our and calibrated our understanding of behaviours, and how we want to lead and bring people on and create an environment where mistakes can be made, and you're not going to be suddenly, the consequences are going to be so dire that it leads to other behaviours like integrity, saying you're doing something and you're not. Perhaps I think you probably can get the gist, but the point is that I'm not that is the sort of change in relatively short order that the army has done in order to address how it behaves. And I suppose for me, that was me having that conversation with that young individual. I was chuffed to bits when he passed out. It was commissioned, sorry. And it was a really, when you get personally and emotionally invested, when you're looking at developing your individuals so that that they can go and become part of a more effective team because they've learnt from the experience, they're going to be more effective when the push comes to shove on an operational tour, when you're asking quite a lot of people and your soldiers. So that's where the leadership code has landed, I think, effectively in the organisation. But it can be applicable to wherever you end up working, I would say, as well. So that's really, I think, all I was going to sort of try and weave in here. The importance of what leaders are, what leaders know, what leaders do, and importantly, how they do it. And I'm here to be able to answer any of your questions or observations that you may have on what I've just said.
Excellent, Lucy. Thank you very much for that. I mean, there's a huge amount of personal insight as well as some good academic insight, and combining the two together into that. You know, it always, you know, when we have people talk about leadership and they talk about things like resources and teams, which is really important, we forget that, you know, this is about, you know, a social activity involves other people and how we relate to other people and how other people relate to us. And I think that really came through, certainly in the sort of little vignettes that you put forward, but clearly in terms of your abilities as a leader. So what we'd like to do is open the floor for questions. If you have a question, can you just put your name in the chat function, or put your hand up, or maybe turn your camera on, and then I will go to you and ask you to unmute yourself. So I'm sure we must have some, whether it's from people who are involved in OTC who want some tips on passing various boards, etc., or whether it's relating to some of Lucy's insight. And we have a question from Laura Mays. Laura.
Hi, can you hear me? My Wi-Fi.
Yes, I can.
Oh, perfect. Thank you for the presentation. It's so interesting. I'm so happy I get like chance to ask this question. I was just wondering, I guess I'd just more be interested to know what you think the most difficult part of being a leader is.
Well, again, thank you, Laura. That's a really useful, you know, really interesting question, actually, because I think I've got a couple of sparks. My brain's working a bit slower. It's 5:30, isn't it? But I would say that it's keeping, well, two things, right? The first one is making decisions that you know are not going to land necessarily that well, are not going to be that popular. So for me at the moment, I'm asking the team here to work quite a few weekends, which you might think, oh, well, you know, how difficult can that be? Well, when they've also got challenges at home, when they've got family that are vulnerable, when they've got children that they're having to homeschool, and I'm asking them to give that extra bit, you know, I'm very conscious of what I'm asking them to do, if that makes sense. So that can be difficult because you know it's just not going to land well. However, if you ground it in purpose and the reason why, and you align it to what the value of the organisation is, you know, listen, if we don't deliver this on Saturday and Sunday next week, these people are not going to have the opportunity to realise their ambition to be commissioned as an army officer for at least another 6-7 months. So if we can pull it out of the bag and just give that bit extra time and effort, that marginal gain that we can offer as part of our programme is going to have a massive difference on that individual and the rest of the group. So if you can, so whilst it's difficult making decisions like that, explaining why can make a difference, and you bring the team with you rather than alienate them. And so that's one aspect of leadership. The second one I would say is being able to keep your head about you when all others are losing theirs, to paraphrase a famous quote. Sometimes you just don't feel on form, or it's been a difficult day for you, and you have to try and put that emotion away and just and focus on what you need to be doing. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be honest with yourself or the people you're have the privilege of working with, because I think it's important that they do see that sometimes things can be difficult for you. Authentic leadership is something that is touted. Another phrase I've heard is appropriately transparent, which means you don't burst into tears every 5 minutes, but you do need to make sure that people see you as who you are. And you know what, it's that's a salutary lesson, isn't it? Just to make sure that you're yourself and you're comfortable with what that looks like and feels like. So that's a very long answer to your question, Laura. Thank you.
Long answers to questions. Lucy, we'll turn you into an academic at some point.
I'll try and be shorter so we get more in.
No, it's excellent. Good question, Laura, and thank you for that answer, Lucy. So next we have a question from Tom. Tom Vincent, please.
Good evening. Thank you very much for your talk, Colonel. It was a really well-balanced presentation of the leadership code. As a junior subaltern myself who's isolating because of COVID, I guess what I wanted to ask you is whether you had a sort of one-line catch-all for a junior commander, and if so, what would that be?
A one-line catch-all. You like a meme or something, you know. Do you know what? I might have one. I'm just. I think, because I was always thinking about, you know, when you have to stand up in front of your troop and you've got to say a couple of things and you need to nail it, otherwise the troops will just think you're rubbish and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I used to have. When I was speaking to the cadets, actually, and it was also what I used to do when I was a subunit commander. So that's when I had, for those who are not in the army, it's sort of about 120 people that you're responsible for. I think the first one of them is to get the small things right, and that's the reason why at Sandhurst we get excited about fluff on berry. Because for those of you who may or may not know, we have things called show parades where if you don't get something right, you have to re-show what you didn't get right. You know, iron shirt is crease, so re-show crease removed from iron or from your shirt or whatever it might be. There's a reason for doing that, and this is why we incorporated it when I was there as part of the learning. Is because if you can't get something as simple as making sure you look smart or presentable when you're asked to do that, when it's not unreasonable, then what are you going to do when you're really tired and you're trying to focus things? If you don't make sure it's really instilled early, you start taking shortcuts, and taking shortcuts is a surefire way of leading your troops into a bad situation quickly. So get the small things right. Do the best that you can do, because how can you possibly do anything more? And the last bit is to be yourself, which I mentioned briefly earlier, so I won't go and waffle on about that. But it's really important. I think if you can encapsulate that in a maxim and live by it and have that as your back of the notebook. Am I still like that? Do I still see that in me? I think you'll be all right. So good luck, Tom.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Colonel.
Be safe as well. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any more hands popping up anywhere? Anyone like to ask this question? Amelia.
Hiya. Thanks for the talk. It was really great, really interesting. So I'm doing a PGCE at the moment, and so I'm trying to apply what you're saying to sort of a classroom environment. And one thing I thought of, you mentioned that you shouldn't focus too much on the task at hand. You need to obviously think about your team. But when you're limited on time and you've got so much to do like you would have in a classroom, how do you balance that?
It's a really good question, Amelia. And I think it depends on so many things, obviously. But part of the leadership behaviours is about knowing your team. It's about identifying strengths and weaknesses. And even if you've got a particular problem, whether it be a written problem or a practical problem, by getting the team to say, listen, I'm really good at maths. No, I'm really good at the English. I can do the writing stuff. I can draw pictures. I can do this. All this positive, what I can do, not what I can't do. And then that can then be brought together for whatever the task is. So then the sum of the individuals becomes greater as a team than it does if you were just trying to do everything yourself. So I've done part of the selection that we do here at Westbury is linked into that. So we only have 8 people as part of the team. We have a practical problem that we have to solve outside. There's, you know, you've got to be able to listen to the words that are given. You've got to be able to apply it in context, and you've got to be able to work as a team. And sometimes you might choose the lighter person to do the leap of faith, or you might have somebody that's better at rope tying to do another task. So it's finding what sort of age group, Amelia?
I'm doing secondary science.
Oh, brilliant. So it's, you know, I don't know if you're doing if you're looking at where you're putting a pivot on a cantilever, you know, where we put the weight, you could do that practically outside. It'd be, you know, for example, and you know, you've got some people that will be good at doing the recording, some people that would be good at doing the physical moving kit around, and other people that can do the actual direction of stuff. So it's however you want to do it, but I think it's getting people to appreciate where their strengths lie, not what they can't do. Hope that helps.
Super, thank you.
Good luck.
That's
with
really
it.
helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Amelia.
Thanks so much.
Just put a notification that if anybody doesn't feel confident coming on camera, that they can post questions in the chat, and I'll relay them onto you. Laura, your hand's gone back up again. Does that mean you have a second question?
Yeah, it does. Sorry.
Oh, please fire away. Please fire away.
It's a different question, because I know that you're a massive role model for, you know, girls who want to be officers, but I was just wondering who you look up to for inspiration.
Well, it's a great question. It's a tricky one, because it's interesting that you use the phrase "look up to," because I get my feed from the most innocuous places. It used to be straightforward for me, you know, it would be my mum, be Her Majesty the Queen, and, you know, all of that sort of stuff. And it would be my first music teacher, who was awesome, and I could do Wuthering Heights too with impunity in the middle of the classroom, and to give you that confidence. But what I'm getting these days is I get a feed in from my children. I've got a 16-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son. They are awesome and so grounded. And every time I've had one of those days, I go back and grab a hug off them, and they're great. Or my daughter will come out with something that's really, yeah, okay, I didn't think of that. So in answer to the question, it's very kind of you to say that about the role modeling, and it's interesting, because I think we all can be role models, and we all are role models, but our context all just changes. So it might be that your big sister or top cousin, or, you know, all that kind of thing going on, and you'll be surprised how many people are, you know, even the first years that are listening on this call will have a second or third years that they want to emulate. But what's really important, I think, when I'm very lucky to be in the position I'm in. So I'm forever making sure that I can do everything I possibly can to emulate what I think are the right things to do, where that moral compass needs to be, live the values, not just read the list. You know, I really embrace it all, and make myself accessible for people, so that I can help point them in the right direction, give them the confidence that they can become something better than they are already. Yeah, and so I feed off of all sorts of spaces, and people and organisation. I never stop learning.
Thank you so much.
Great, thank you for the question, Laura. And we have a question now coming in on the chat from Charlie Milne. Charlie.
Can you hear me?
Got it, Charlie.
Thank you for the talk. It was really interesting. I was just wondering, as I think there's probably quite a few young people starting off in potential careers and stuff. Clearly, you've had quite a lot of really interesting experiences. I was wondering, what if you could, one thing you've learned throughout your career, do you think would be really useful or beneficial to people starting off in their journeys? What would you know, something you know now that you didn't know before, what would that piece of advice be?
Well, I sort of mentioned it a little bit earlier, and it sounds as a complete cliche, but it's to trust myself and be myself. I spent, I'll never forget when I left Exeter, full of the joys of spring, and I went travelling for I did a thing called Op Rally for 3 or 4 months, and I came back thinking I was the bee's knees, and I was interested in being in television or getting involved. So I did a show reel, which was I looked at it the other day. It's really embarrassing, and I had a CV that I thought was, you know, I got it all typed out, and I mean it was just so Billy Basic. But I took those and I went cold calling around London to try and, you know, thinking, I know I'm awesome. You should see this in front of you. And I was just so completely naive, and I felt that I remember audition. I can't believe I'm saying this on, it's recorded, but I tried to audition for a Madonna thing. A Madonna. I can't dance, but anyway, I don't know. So the point, the bottom line is, I think, when it comes to starting out your career, is you know, which I wish I'd have done, is be more confident in what I can do, not what I can't do, as linked into Laura's question. Sorry, to Amelia's question. Definitely go for that. I would also be, especially when I got in the groove of being in the army and everything. I joined the army at a time where it was a different sort of environment as a female minority in the. I'm still in a minority, we're getting there. But I wish I felt more empowered earlier to call things out that I didn't think were right. So that was really important for me. And what I would pass on to you, that I wish I'd have had the light bulb moment earlier, was to make sure that I call things out. Perhaps I challenge things that aren't right, and this generation, and you're part of that, you know, Charlie, is to make sure if you don't see something going right, you do something about it. In my view, you know, it's difficult to do sometimes. It's a question I always ask candidates when they're here: what would they do differently for the challenging situation? And the other bit, as I mentioned, it's you know, being yourself, being confident in what you're doing. And don't forget, you know, it all seems, I can imagine, I genuinely can imagine what it's like, because I got so many knockbacks before I then ended up joining the army, that you can start losing the faith and feeling that you are rubbish. It's just all there is something out there for all of us. We've all got some talent to offer. Even me at 50, whatever it is, when I eventually leave the army, we've all got something we can offer. It's just that other people don't know it yet. So wherever a door closes, another one opens, and all that kind of stuff. But really, I can't promise you it is true, and you just need. It's difficult to understand that when you can feel a little bit. When a few more doors than you'd like have gone in your face, if that makes sense. But, you know, confidence, calling it out, that's what I would say.
Thank you.
And being you.
Cheers.
Great. Thank you for the question, Charlie. We have one from Richard Pendry. Richard, please.
Hi,
I just wanted to say thank you very much for the presentation. I'm actually doing my AOSB briefing at the start of December, and I think I've got a bit of an example question from the interview, which was, who's your favourite leader and why?
Who's my favourite leader?
Yes.
And why?
Yes.
Or it is a thing. There is. Do you know what? I'm not sure I have one. Isn't that a really easy way of wriggling out of a question like that? Every time I meet somebody, I think, God, that's bloody. Sorry, excuse my language. That's really amazing what you've done. I had the privilege last week of being on a Foundation for Leadership Through Sport event, which I commend you. I can see you've got a RFU thing stuck up behind you. So maybe Google that, Foundation for Leadership Through Sport, and there's some really good resources on there to help you for leadership through sport. Anyway, and Sue Campbell was on there. I was hosting a panel discussion with her and a couple of others, and there was some just some amazing bits and pieces, and I thought, oh, that sounded really good. You came across ever so well. So I'm very fickle. I keep changing. So I don't have a favourite. And the reason why is because I think everybody's got something to offer, and I like to draw upon all different sources. So Richard, good luck with your briefing. I hope the weather holds for you, because it's a bit chilly here at the moment. It rained right royally this morning.
Yeah. I hope lockdown doesn't intervene on it as well, because it's just at the end.
Well, if it does, listen, don't worry. We've got backup plans, so you will be able to get your briefing done in time to get to your goal of doing a commissioning course. So
brilliant.
Don't worry, we will make it happen.
Thank you very much.
All right, good luck.
Thank you, Richard. Best of luck. And we have a question now from Emily.
Hopefully that's working. Thank you very much, Mum, this evening.
Pleasure.
Sorry, the fuse box has just gone in my house, so it's a bit dark. I was wondering what your biggest piece of advice is for someone who has just maybe become a platoon or a troop commander, so their first platoon either out of Sandhurst or within, for some of us, an OTC environment.
When you first got your platoon, well, think about how, think about the kind of, keep it nice and simple, and think about how it is you want the team to work under your leadership. And you don't have to have the answer for everything, and you don't have to do everything yourself. You can have you can delegate out, etc. You're not expected to know everything. You've got some talented people, so harness the talent and accredit them where it's due, and lead with confidence, with a simple set of maxims that you want to try and go for. So in the OTC sort of environment, and I know your CEO quite well, he's coming here actually in a couple of weeks. So he, give yourself, manageable goals that you want to try and achieve within a time frame. So this term you want to just do 2 meet and greets or chit chats, and you're going to meet each other offline as well, or whatever it might be. I don't know. And you want to get some merch, as my daughter calls it, for the platoon or whatever it might be. So do something that's going to foster that team spirit, and make sure you know them by understanding where their strengths are.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully that helps.
Yeah,
good luck with it.
Well, we have time for a few more, and I can see a familiar name with their hand up. Luke.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm not sure if my camera's off or not. Oh no, there we go.
Hey Luke.
Hi Colonel. Hi. Thank you very much for the insights into leadership and everything. They were really insightful. Sorry if I kind of take you on a different track here, away from what we usually have. But the army is now taking a really central role in the coronavirus response pandemic, with kind of setting up and running the mass testing sites in Liverpool. And right at the start, with when kind of we were flailing around in the dark more with our response, the army was seen as kind of a real stabilizing factor when it was deployed to run testing sites. It seems that the armed forces since 2008 have kind of had the looming threat of massive cuts, which they've seen and have been forecast over the last few weeks to personnel. Do you think that, so far the Army's kind of exemplary leadership role in disaster response, both kind of with and previous to the coronavirus and during the coronavirus, during floods as well, in the Western Low Countries, do you see this as a possibility of kind of a really different argument for maintaining army personnel levels, rather than just, they keep the baddies away, and the simple, you just need people in the field with pew 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 guns and tanks and things, like we need them for kind of internal disaster response capacity?
Wow, absolutely. I mean, the interesting journey from the global effects of defence, global effects on defence, and through to how we develop our policy and our defence planning and our strategic direction, etc. I mean, Martin and I overlap when we were at the Defence Academy together. So Martin, you'll be more than aware of the complexities there. But our raison d'etre would be to go against whatever the defence policy of the time is and the security strategy. And when the thing is, that's just words and environments, and a lot of it is, possibly in the next, in the next 20 years, this is what we need to be aiming for. And it sometimes can be difficult to predict it. But where we're going at the moment is the defence. In order to still meet the strategic direction, is an emphasis more on cyber, bots, all that kind of stuff in terms of prosecuting the grey area between peacekeeping, war fighting. So that there's a grey area there where we think we should be exploiting with more technology, which means it changes our emphasis in our equipment programs, etc. What we still need to be able to do is to prosecute a close battle, kinetically. So we still need the tanks and guns. That's the premise. That's what's going on behind the scenes on a different project, and it's very timely to ask that because it's absolutely what's on the mind of the Chief of the Defence Staff and the Chief of the General Staff at the moment in their programmes. But within our strategic guidance and what we need to do as an armed force, and I'm talking about all the services, is we still need to be able to provide military aid to the civil authorities, MACA tasks, which is what you've seen in recent years, whether it would be fuel strikes, whether it would be fire service, whether it would be flood damaging, and the current COVID-19 situation. We're well placed to be able to support the National Health Service and other government departments because we, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of knowledge and what leaders know, we've got good planning tools to be able to help run a large organisation and all of the dynamics. We're 24/7 and we're already paid for. So why wouldn't you use this rather than a load of consultants, maybe? So long answer to a very good question, which is about where we see ourselves in the future. And the answer is not really sure. And I would be on a knife edge to comment on where the strategic direction is going. Frankly, I don't know. But we're in a very tight fiscal environment, and so somebody's got to make a call, and I'm glad it's not me.
So thank you, Luke. Lucy, if you don't mind me very, very briefly jumping in to do a little bit of self-publicity for the university on that point. I mean, the university have been working with RAND Corporation on behalf of the MOD, looking at climate change as a driver of insecurity, obviously with the appointment of Lieutenant General Yuji, operating under that construct. And the first pillar out of the initial phase of work that the UK's MOD wanted us to look at was those very macro humanitarian and disaster relief operations, because of the nature and the prevalence of them, in the sense that, this is not going away. And it's really good to see the Ministry of Defence across the board taking leadership on this as an issue, and primarily because it has resources, it has size, it has scalability, and it has deployability in a way that other government departments don't. And therefore, I know that I've spoken to some students who sometimes raise concerns about the military getting involved in these operations, but actually the military provided a massive resource base for the UK in order to enhance its resilience. And for me, that's inevitably a good thing. I had to turn my camera off because the security guard was going around the building and was about to lock me in, so I need to disappear off this. And I know we've reached the end, and I hope if people had any questions, we can find a way to continue pose questions to you. I'm delighted that you could give up an hour of your time to speak to staff and students this evening. In terms of my personal takeaways from your talk, was one of what I mentioned earlier in terms of that personal insight, which really does provide that sort of that gold plating extra that you can't get from reading the books, reading the material that you've put through, looking at John Adair's work and other leadership theories are available. But that personal insight, you know, you cannot buy experience like that. You cannot buy insight like that. So thank you very much for that. I hope that we can meet again in better times. And the next time that you're doing something with the university, we can present you with one of the coveted Strategy and Security Institute mugs, which are in desks all over the place. So, ranging from CDS to General Petraeus, who both have SSI mugs. So in terms of entering that sort of cohort of great leaders, you're certainly there already, Lucy. Thank you very much for giving up your time this evening.
Well, thank you very much, Martin, and also to the rest of the team behind the scenes. I know Bex has done a great job in getting all this up together, and Ellie as well. So listen, it just remains for me to say, grab opportunities that you can while you've got it. Don't be too overtaken by the COVID environment, etc. And know it's challenging and everything, because wherever there's a challenge, there's an opportunity to think differently, more creatively. And I genuinely wish you all the very best. Please keep safe and keep well, and enjoy the rest of your time at Exeter. Thank you.